are rolling.
hppodcraft.com.
There was thunder in the air on the night I went to the deserted mansion atop Tempest Mountain to find the lurking fear. I was not alone, for foolhardiness was not then mixed with that love of the grotesque and the terrible, which has made my career a series of quests for strange horrors in literature and in life. With me were two faithful and muscular men for whom I had sent when the time came. Men long associated with me in my ghastly explorations because of their peculiar fitness.
This is, of course, the first chapter of The Lurking Fear.
What are you talking about? Who are you?
I am Chad Pfeiffer.
Oh, Chad. Nice to meet you. I'm Chris Lackey.
Chris Lackey. How would you like to co-host a show with me?
I'd be delighted.
Wonderful. Why don't we call it the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast?
That sounds great.
And we'll put it at hppodcraft.com?
I love it. Hey, Chad.
Glad to have your consent.
In all seriousness, this is our 30th episode.
No way, really?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Man, that went fast.
It did go fast.
Holy smoke.
So just, sit on that for a moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who was that we just heard?
That's Paul McLean. He's better known as Paul of Cthulhu.
Aha! Of Yogg-Sothoth.com.
That's
correct?
right, yes.
Great
Wonderful
job, Paul.
podcast that they do over there. Focuses primarily on the role-playing game, Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. And this week we are covering The Lurking Fear. That excerpt was from the first chapter of The Lurking Fear, The Shadow on the Chimney. These chapters in the story have titles because they are serialized.
Yes, this was in just as Herbert West Reanimator was in Homebrew. And it was broken up into 4 parts. This time, however, Lovecraft was really stoked because he didn't have to do a summary of last week's within the story.
Right.
The publisher put a little synopsis before the story started,
Exactly.
so that, it was easier for everybody.
There were some rejected titles for the story, actually. The Prowling Anxiety was one of them. The Loitering Awkwardness. The Creeping Sad Face. This is all true. And this one, I actually think would have been a better title. The Skulking Ball Tingle. They were afraid that would turn off some of the female readership.
So you've got that information from
I do, yeah.
one of Joshi's books, I assume?
No, it's just, I'll tell you about it when we're off.
Okay,
off
okay,
air.
great. Yeah, those were really
But yeah,
good,
I can back it up.
Good titles.
Thanks. There's all kinds of great descriptions. I just want to say that in this story, Lovecraft is the king of the hyphenated adjective.
He sure is, man.
He creates little adjectival phrases by hyphenating 2 words. I counted 36 of them.
Whoa!
In here. And I actually want to just read this list before we go too deep into the synopsis because I think it provides kind of a fun preview for the story. He talks about the ancient lightning-scarred tree, the weedy fulgurite pitted earth, hand-woven baskets, that's pretty standard, the antique grove-circled stone house, the half-glimpsed fiend, his self-imposed isolation, the last mound-covered reaches of Tempest Mountain, the vast box-like pile, the tree-muffled thunder, a wide 4-poster bedstead, again, that's kind of the forest-swathed mansion, wild-armed titan trees, that brain-blasting shadow, a non-material agency, the horror-visited hamlet, the ill-fated squatter hamlet, the oak-girt mansion, the low snake-like mound, giant bat-winged griffins, trans-cosmic gulfs, far-reaching tentacles, the tempest-racked night, the lightning-pierced region, a wolf-fanged ghost, a wealthy New Amsterdam merchant. Didn't need to hyphenate New Amsterdam, did it anyway. The sullen, odd-eyed Martinses, faraway hills, my single-minded fever, a weak-roofed cabin, those vast serpent-like roofs, this one's beautiful, moonlitten, mound-marked meadows, alliteration and 2 hyphenates in that one, the briar-choked cellar, rat-like scurrying, a loathsome night-spawned flood of organic corruption, mound-like tentacles, and the terrible and thunder-crazed House of Martens. That's all of them.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's great.
Yeah. Amazing.
That pleases me.
It pleases me too. That's why I wrote them all down. This guy and his 2 muscular companions.
Yes.
What are they up to? Well, he says,
We had started quietly from the village because of the reporters who still lingered about after the eldritch panic of a month before, the nightmare creeping death. Later, I thought, they might aid me, but I did not want them then. Would to God I had let them share the search, that I might not have had to bear the secret alone for so long, to bear it alone for the fear the world would call me mad, or gold-mad itself, at the demon implications of the thing. Now that I am telling it anyway, lest the brooding make me a maniac, I wish I'd never concealed it, for I, and I only, know what manner of fear lurked on that spectral, and desolate mountain.
Now, you heard the name Martens on in that list.
Yeah.
And the Martens mansion is up on top of Tempest Mountain, and
Yes.
that's where the lurking fear dwells.
Right,
really.
right. And the Martins mansion, I mean, we find out more about it later.
He doesn't give too much history in the first chapter, but he sort of lays out the facts of why he's here to investigate. He says,
For over 100 years, the antique, grove-circled stone house had been the subject of stories incredibly wild and monstrously hideous. Stories of a silent, colossal, creeping death which stalked abroad in summer. With whimpering insistence, the squatters told tale of a demon which seized lone wayfarers after dark, either carrying them off or leaving them in a frightful state of gnawed dismemberment. While sometimes they whispered of blood trails toward the distant mansion. Some said the thunder called the lurking fear out of its habitation, while others said the thunder was its voice.
so it's a Castle Dracula kind of setup.
Yeah, it's an old scary mansion.
Yeah.
Up on the hill.
And the townspeople who are routinely destroyed by something up there.
Uh-huh.
This has been happening for a long time. There was an incident a month before
Yep.
that has gotten this particular searcher after horror
Yeah.
all interested in the area of Tempest Mountain.
Mm-hmm. All correct. Everything you're saying, I agree with.
Which is up in the Catskills.
It is in the Catskills.
In New York. And there are hints in this chapter that has something to do with the Martens family history.
Right.
Something about they have dissimilar eyes, and there was some murder that cursed the family line. Although there are no more Martenses up there, the place is deserted.
Yep.
Martens is a Dutch name.
Yep. That is correct.
I think that there might be some biographical significance to that with him.
Well, Martins is... People speculate a little bit on what this is. It could either be that Martins was the street that was right next to Sonia Green's apartment in New York.
Right. And New York, having been in New Amsterdam at
Yeah.
one time, there's lots of Dutch names there still. Like
Flatbush, Brooklyn is where...
Brooklyn, yeah.
exactly.
Brooklyn is a Dutch name. Harlem.
Yeah.
Staten.
Well, New York was New Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So-
As the song says.
What song?
Even old New York was once New Amsterdam. Why they changed it, I can't say. People just like it better that way. Take
I have
me
no
back.
idea. I have no idea what you're talking
You
about.
just were trying to make me jerk.
The terror which brought me to the scene was a sudden and portentous confirmation of the mountaineer's wildest legends. One summer night, after a thunderstorm of unprecedented violence, the countryside was aroused by a squatter stampede which no mere delusion could create. The pitiful throngs of natives shrieked and whined of the unnameable horror which had descended upon them, and they were not doubted. They had not seen it, but had heard such cries from one of their hamlets that they knew a creeping death had come.
This tragedy happens. There was a terrible storm.
Yeah, in fact, the Tempest Mountain gets its name because thunderstorms are always rocking
Yes,
it.
it's frequent.
Always.
It's frequent.
Yeah. In fact, he describes the earth around it in the beginning as fulgurite pitted, which I had to look up.
Oh.
Fulgurites are they're little natural hollow glass tubes that are formed when lightning
hits.
superheats the ground when it hits.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
That was kind
I
of-
did not know that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. That's from the Latin fulgur, meaning thunderstorm.
Oh, very nice.
Or thunderbolt, rather.
Thunderbolt. After one storm, there was kind of this mass murder. Basically, a bunch of these hill people, I think, what do they say, like 60 of them?
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, I think it's like 75 people are gone.
Oh, right.
A third of them they find remains from.
Right.
So this lightning hit this settlement,
Yeah.
and it dropped the floor out from, or the ground out from
Yes.
under a bunch of houses, and then it was just carnage that they found. So they know that something descended on these people and massacred them. But the great thing about his wording there is the pitiful.
Yeah, I know. His totally unmasked contempt for
Yeah.
poor destitute people.
You know, it's funny. He as isolated as Lovecraft is, he's definitely a city guy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's freaked out by the countryside.
It scares him.
Yeah, he likes being in Providence. So, you know, another thing that was strange about this is the village that was attacked was 3 miles away from the Martins' mansion.
Yeah, it was.
Still, the townspeople say, hey, it's got something to do with that place, but the police are like, okay. They go up there and they look around and it's deserted.
Yeah.
So they don't really investigate. But when the story hits the papers, a whole bunch of investigators descend on the town,
Right,
journalists,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
date is given as 1921.
Yeah, August 5th.
Yeah, and when our narrator reads about it, he heads down there too.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of waits for all the nut jobs and
Right, just the
reporters.
things that calm him down. Well, and also not just nut jobs, but people that aren't as clever as he is.
Right.
You know, like there seems to be a little bit of an air of superiority.
Exactly.
To this guy.
We're back to now
Yeah.
where we started. Our guy and his two muscled friends, they head up to the mansion now that people have mostly moved on to other scandals
Right.
to cover. And he's sort of been through the house before, so he's made a plan.
Oh, right. Yes,
You
yes,
know,
yes.
he's been around in the daylight hours, but he wants to get up there during a thunderstorm. He thinks that thunderstorms are calling up some kind of death demon from the house.
Yeah, or something. I mean, he's pretty open-minded at this point in the story to know exactly what it is. It could be a monster, it could be some kind of phenomenon. So he does have a plan with these two guys. His idea is he doesn't know if it's coming from the house or if it's coming from outside of the house.
Right.
So him and the guys, the two muscly dudes that are with him,
And they have names. It's George Bennett and William Toby.
Bennett and Toby.
Yeah.
So Bennett and Toby and him are armed and ready to rock in case, if it's a creature, if it's a monster, whatever the heck it is. The way they do this is they go up to Martin's old room.
Yeah, Jan Martins.
Jan.
Right.
Jan,
He doesn't say who he is yet, but
Yes.
he says we're in Jan Martin's room.
Somebody important in
Yeah.
the Martin's family. And they push the bed right up against the window, and he
Right.
puts a ladder out the window
Yeah, 3 rope ladders go out the window
Uh-huh.
on one side.
on one side, and the other side is the open door and the fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, whatever it is that's killing people comes from the outside, we can go in the house and take shelter. And if it
Yeah.
comes from out of the house, we could split.
Right, and they all have automatics.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
so they spread out in a little pattern on the bed.
Uh-huh.
It's like a fun little goofy sleepover.
Yes, yes.
Where the muscle bound guys are on each side of him and he's in the middle.
Right.
But the plan is f***ed right away because they all start falling asleep.
Right. Yeah, this is one of those things I'm like, don't all lay in bed. One guy
Yeah.
should be, sitting up and
Right.
walking around. Guarding while you're lying down in a bed seems like a real bad idea.
Right.
And he's so surprised. He's like, oh, this sleepiness came over us. It was a drowsiness. I'm like, yeah, you're laying in bed in
Right.
the middle of the night. Come on. Of course you're going to be tired. But anyway.
So he's staring at the fireplace and drifting off and having dreams. He notices the other guys are too. And then there's this big bolt of thunder. It wakes him up a little bit, and he realizes that one of the other sleepers has put his arm across his chest. And he goes to sleep again, and then there's
Yeah.
a huge bolt of thunder, and he realizes that Toby is gone. But the arm of the other guy is still on his chest.
Then came the devastating stroke of lightning which shook the whole mountain, lit the darkest crypts of the hoary grove, and splintered the patriarch of the twisted trees. In the demon flash of a monstrous fireball, the sleeper started up suddenly while the glare from beyond the window threw his shadow vividly upon the chimney above the fireplace from which my eyes have never strayed. That I am still alive and sane is a marvel I cannot fathom. I cannot fathom it, for the shadow on that chimney was not that of George Bennett or of any other human creature, but a blasphemous abnormality from hell's nethermost craters. A nameless, shapeless abomination which no mind could fully grasp, and no pen could even partly describe. In another second I was alone in the accursed mansion, shivering and gibbering. George Bennett and William Toby had left no trace, not even of a struggle. They were never heard of again.
Yeah. So, you snooze, you lose.
Yeah, something was in the chamber. It killed his two friends, and it was taking a nap with him.
Yeah, that's what maybe what he thought was the arm on him was maybe the creature bumped into him and he just thought, but that doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah.
did the creature cuddle up with him and like get snuggly for a
Well,
little bit?
he says that the sleeper started up suddenly. So I think the thing had taken care of his two buddies and then was just hanging out there.
Yeah, or gosh, I don't know. Or maybe it touched him and woke him, and as it touched him, he woke up.
Right. Maybe it was Bennett's arm on him, and then
Yeah, and then
when
like
it came off, it was the guy tearing him away.
yeah,
Maybe.
could be. It's a little ambiguous, but that's kind of scary.
It
you
is
don't really
kinda
know
scary.
what the heck's going on and what exactly happened.
And with that, we go into the second chapter, A Passer in the Storm. Yeah, our guy somehow, after that incident, managed to get back to his car and slip unobserved back to the village. Him saying unobserved leads me to believe he didn't report
Yeah, no,
any of it.
He didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell the police. He didn't,
But he does feel he needs to tell somebody.
Right. I
About
mean,
it.
this is pretty intense stuff.
Pretty intense. So he's got a journalist buddy that he likes.
Right. This guy that he met named Arthur Monroe.
Monroe? He's about 35, and our guy says he's got intelligence and taste, so I assume that means he's also arrogant.
Yeah.
I get along with him well. He hates all these townspeople, too.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. He's kind of got dark hair. Seems very striking and cool. And I mean, his description. Oh, also, just a little backstory. We talked about Lovecraft kind of was a lonely child and all
Yeah.
those things. But in doing some research on the story, I find out that the Monroe name was the name of these two brothers, Chester and Harold, that Lovecraft knew when he was a kid. Not only did he have friends, Harold had gotten back in touch with Lovecraft a little over a year before this story was written. So, he refound, this old friend of his from when he was a kid.
Right.
And then
Friends on Facebook.
Exactly. But then they went and revisited a clubhouse that they had constructed together when they were boys.
Well, there you go.
Maybe Lovecraft isn't as a lonely, kid in his room as much as, it kind of was led to believe.
There you go. Maybe.
And he built a clubhouse. That requires some.
Yeah, you got to work together.
Yeah, you got to work together, and you got to, hammer some nails and lift some wood. And
You have to form a club.
Well, I thought Lovecraft would be too busy, wiping his brow and complaining about the humidity and stuff.
Right. But, now, the Monroe in this story, Arthur, he hears our protagonist out, and he doesn't think he's crazy.
No.
But he does say, look, let's stall on going back up there for a bit until we've done some research. So they kind of canvass all the countryside and all the little hamlets for details about the other incidents that have happened up here.
Right.
They even managed to get an ancestral diary of some kind.
Yeah.
So they're learning. My favorite bit from this section is one line he says,
We came to know the squatters better. We found them curiously likable in many ways.
I thought, hey, maybe Lovecraft has some insight into his own prejudices. I mean,
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
If you get to know people, as it turns out, not so bad after all.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, he and Arthur are learning that these people in the surrounding hamlets have been getting killed for generations.
Yeah, and it coincides with these storms.
Right, and they can't really blame wildlife or anything because there isn't any wildlife up there.
Yeah, when they go out into those woods in it's devoid of animals.
So it's October now, and they've been researching for a long time. There haven't been any more thunderstorms, so they're getting a little antsy. And as they scour,
and it's getting close to winter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they winter, nothing goes on up here. So they're scouring one of these last unnamed hamlets for information, and they're kind of doing it rapidly.
Yeah.
As the afternoon advanced, it became increasingly difficult to see, and we heard the rumble of a thunderstorm gathering over Tempest Mountain. The sound in such a locality naturally stirred us, though less than it would have done at night. As it was, we hoped desperately that the storm would last until well after dark, and with that hope turned our aimless hillside searching towards the nearest inhabited hamlet to gather a body of squatters as helpers in the investigation. Timid as they were, a few of the younger men were sufficiently inspired by our protective leadership to promise such help.
Protective leadership?
Well, they have heat.
Right. But, I wish these guys knew that the protagonist fell asleep earlier and both of his bodyguards got killed, and then he didn't even report it. That's his protective leadership.
That's his protective, yeah. Well, he's got heat, man. He's got a gun.
Well, it starts really coming down.
Yeah, it starts to rain. The storm is just kicking into full gear, and so they run back to kind of a little shack, a little
like a little cabin.
A little cabin.
The most non-porous, I think.
Yes, exactly.
And there's a great bolt of lightning while they're waiting inside there. It's Arthur and our protagonist and a few of the other.
Well, when they get in, they close the door. And
Yeah.
there's like this shutter that gets put up over the window, and it's like a kind of a ramshackle sort of old broken thing, but it's still sturdy and still works.
Right. But when that lightning hits outside, it hits a tree, and Arthur's kind of curious about what it looks like. So he unlatches the shutter and he sticks his head outside to watch the storm.
Yeah.
Gradually, a calming of the wind and dispersal of the unusual darkness told of the storm's passing. I had hoped it would last into the night to help our quest, but a furtive sunbeam from a knothole behind me removed the likelihood of such a thing. Suggesting to Monroe that we had better get some light even if more showers came, I unbarred and opened the crude door. The ground outside was a singular mass of mud and pools, with fresh heaps of earth from the slight landslide, but I saw nothing to justify the interest which kept my companion silently leaning out the window. Crossing to where he leaned, I touched his shoulder, but he did not move. Then, as I playfully shook him and turned him around, I felt the strangling tendrils of a cancerous horror whose roots reached into illimitable pasts and fathomless abysms of the night that broods beyond time. For Arthur Monroe was dead, and on what remained of his chewed and gouged head, there was no longer a face.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
That's awesome.
That's pretty nasty.
Yeah, that's nasty, and that's a complete like horror movie moment.
I
too,
know.
That's the second horror movie. I mean, this thing is just like Herbert West in a way because it's action packed.
Yeah, it does feel very cinematic.
In that first chapter, you have the whole. I mean, if it really was the thing's arm, it's that moment in the movie where you're in bed with the monster. You roll over and go, ah! And then here, it's pulling the body away. His head's chewed off, or his face.
Yeah, his face is gone.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, I know this was made into a movie, but I've never seen it.
That was it was a Full Moon production.
It was directed by C. Courtney Joyner.
Yeah, but what's that guy that used to run all those Full Moon productions?
Charles Band.
Charles Band. Yeah, it's one of those things. So I don't think it's very good. But
Well, here,
I shouldn't speak out of turn.
I haven't seen it, but I'll read you the synopsis. Ex-con John Martinez returns to his childhood home in Lefferts Corner after serving time for a crime he didn't commit. Martinez visits family friend Kangs, a mortician who has been holding half of a map for him. The map leads to a graveyard where Martinez's father hid the money for the last heist. This doesn't sound anything like the story.
Why bring a profit motive in there? I like it that he's just into creepy stuff. Why does he have to be an ex-con and all that business? Anyway, well, I haven't seen it. I think somebody else should do it.
Now, Stuart Gordon wanted to adapt this movie, I read about, but it didn't happen.
That takes us then into Chapter 3,
What the Red Glare Meant.
We jump right into A Night in November where our guy is digging alone. He says alone and idiotically in the grave of Jan Martens on the night of yet another thunderstorm. And he's really lost it because of what happened to Arthur, who he buried himself.
Yeah,
and just sort of let other people think he'd wandered away somewhere.
Yeah, it says that specifically, that he just kind of let others think, oh yeah, he went off in the woods and we lost him. I don't know where he went.
He says that he's become strangely callous, which becomes. Some people already died. But finally in this chapter, we get some of those details about the Martens family.
History had led me to this archaic grave. History, indeed, was all I had after everything else ended in mocking Satanism. I now believed that the lurking fear was no material thing, but a wolf-fanged ghost that rode the midnight lightning. And I believed, because of the masses of local tradition I had unearthed in my search with Arthur Monroe, that the ghost was that of Jan Martens, who died in 1762.
Well, here's the deal. Okay?
All right, yes.
The house was built in 1670 by Gerrit Martens, who was this wealthy New Amsterdam merchant.
Right.
He didn't like the changes that were happening under British rule, so
No.
he wanted to go somewhere for solitude. So he and all his descendants, moved into this place that he built up there. He built a little, cell or two because it's Thunder Mountain.
Right, yeah, exactly.
It's not Thunder Mountain. Tempest Mountain. If it was Thunder Mountain, it would be a totally different story.
Yeah, it would be a fun ride.
We found a roller coaster. And so they could go to hide down there when they needed to if it was too thundery.
Exactly.
But they pretty much shunned the outside world.
They hated everything to do with the English.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about this today. This comes up a lot in his stories where families will pull away or people will... He talks about it in the picture in the house that people just sought more and more solitude and that made them crazier and crazier.
Yeah.
And it seems like almost a bit of self-awareness because he's constantly, trying to dwell in the 17th century world and pulling away, from the modern, prosaic, poison of life. But I think he knows that makes him crazier. He has some insight into the fact that
I could see that. Yeah,
the more that the more you pull away from a normal world, the less healthy you get.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I could see that. Yeah.
He explains the dissimilarity of eyes that he referenced earlier, that the Martens people all had one blue eye and one brown
eye. Yeah. So that would mean David Bowie is actually a Martens.
You're right. Well, actually, Bowie...
is it one green eye?
No, they color it sometimes, I think, in album covers, but what happened is when he was a kid, he got in some kind of altercation over a girl, and the muscles in his eye got damaged so that it blew out one of his pupils, so it's always dilated.
Oh, I see.
So the difference in his eyes is that one is just huge, so it makes it look like it's a different color,
I see.
but it's actually not. But I think that they've actually colored it for... We'll save it for the David Bowie Literary Podcast. But that's immediately what I thought too, because he's got the two weird eyes, and then he looks like he might be crawling out of a cellar somewhere.
Yeah, it would surprise me.
He looks hungry.
Yeah, he has no eyebrows.
But this does shed some light the squatters being a little subhuman. I mean, maybe there's some truth to what the protagonist is saying about them being so.
Well, yeah, they
because they were breeding.
They were breeding and breeding with their help and breeding with us. So they kind of didn't have their gene pool was pretty small.
Right, it was very small, but it also crept into the hamlets a little bit too.
Out into the woods and the shanties and whatnot.
Now, a lot of these facts we know from Jan Martens because he actually went out into the world when he heard about the Albany Convention, which was pre-revolutionary convention to unify.
1760.
Yes. When he comes back, his family, they don't really like him now because he's so worldly. And he writes to a friend of his, Jonathan Gifford, in 1763 that he's depressed by his, my family's so lame, they're so devolved, And Jonathan says, you know what, I'm going to come out there, I'm going to cheer my buddy up.
His diary states that he reached Tempest Mountain on September 20th, finding the mansion in great decrepitude. The sullen, odd-eyed Martenses, whose unclean animal aspect shocked him, told him in broken gutturals that Jan was dead. He had, they insisted, been struck by lightning the autumn before, and now lay buried behind the neglected sunken gardens. They showed the visitor the grave, barren and devoid of markers. Something in the Martenses' manner gave Gifford a feeling of repulsion and suspicion, and a week later he returned with spade and mattock to explore the sepulchral spot. He found what he expected, a skull crushed cruelly as if by savage blows. So returning to Albany, he openly charged the Martenses with the murder of their kinsman.
Man.
Yeah.
Where was the name? Murder was
the name they gave him.
Murder was the name they gave him? Yeah.
This legal case, though, it doesn't go anywhere.
It doesn't. And because there's not enough evidence, it's, it's all shady. But word gets out.
Right.
And everybody, I mean, before they were shunned, the Martins, now they're really shunned.
Yeah, nobody's selling them.
They won't do business with them.
way.
They can't get any, unless they can get it on that mountain, they don't get it.
So, yeah, they
really
sustain themselves on whatever overripe vegetation they have on the property.
Or what animals they find.
And people see lights there occasionally. I think the last was in 1810, but after that, just
nothing.
Not much activity. In fact, some of the squatters come to check it out in 1816, and they find that nobody's living in the mansion at all anymore. But there is evidence that the family had grown quite large because there's lots of mocked up little extra rooms and penthouses.
Right. But there are no skeletons. Like no remains of dead people. You would think that if all the people that were up there died, there would be bodies. But
they also find that they haven't used, that they probably were still living there and yet hadn't used silverware for a long time. So their appetites or their daily activities had devolved in some way.
They became animalistic.
Right.
I mean, that's what he's implying.
So our guy is thinking maybe this is some revenge killing of some kind going on. Like
I mean,
Friday the 13th scenario.
He thinks it's the ghost of Jan.
Right.
Right, Jan? That's how it's
pronounced?
Jan.
I think
Jan Martens.
I think of Jan Hammer, who wrote the Miami Vice theme.
Well, but I mean, I think it's also kind of funny that that's his... The evidence, the scientific evidence, brought him to the conclusion that it's a ghost of Jan.
I know. He's like, well, they did murder that man, so it would make sense that his ghost is murdering people down in the...
Yeah, I guess. That's...
I bet he's doing it whenever they're, smoking pot or having sex down there, too. Well, so we're back again at the beginning of this chapter when he's digging in the grave.
Yes.
And even when he finds Jan's remains, which are barely there anymore.
Yeah.
For some reason, in his ghostly searches, he keeps digging. And he actually breaks through the ground beneath the grave.
Yeah.
There's some kind of subterranean passage.
Yeah, as he breaks through, it crumbles and he falls into some subterranean passage.
Yeah. He crawls right down with his flashlight and he starts scrambling through this narrow passage. He goes straight towards the house.
I have been scrambling in this way for some time, so that my battery had burned very low when the passage suddenly inclined sharply upward, altering my mode of progress. And as I raised my glance, it was without preparation that I saw glistening in the distance 2 demoniac reflections of my expiring lamp. 2 reflections glowing with a baneful and unmistakable effulgence, and provoking maddeningly nebulous memories. I stopped automatically, though lacking the brain to retreat. The eyes approached, yet of the thing that bore them I could distinguish only a claw. But what a claw!
I don't know when he said that.
What a claw!
Yeah, that's the delivery I heard. I heard like Zoidberg from Futurama.
But what a claw!
Exactly. Then blast! A huge bolt of lightning hits the spot and it causes the passage to crumble in.
Right. Well, I mean, the reflection of the two things is eyes.
Yeah.
He sees eyes. Yeah.
It's the eyes of the monster and its claw, but when the ground comes in, it covers them both.
Yeah.
He manages to climb to the surface.
Right. He digs himself out of this. It's really creepy, and it's raining and the mud and the.
And then he sees off in the distance this red glare.
Yeah, something is shining red. Yeah. A big thing. So.
And 2 days later, he finds out what that means.
In a hamlet 20 miles away, an orgy of fear had followed the bolt which brought me above ground, and the nameless thing had dropped from an overhanging tree into a weak-roofed cabin. It had done a deed, but the squatters had fired the cabin in frenzy before it could escape. It had been doing that deed at the very moment the earth caved in on the thing, with the claw and eyes.
Doing a deed.
Doing a deed. Which I assume is murder and not masturbation.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be a really weird story. Then. But here he was looking at the monster.
Right.
And 20 miles away,
yeah,
something else was killing folks. So
there's more than one.
Or it was the same thing. It was in two places somehow, or there's more than
there's more than one. I think is what he comes to the conclusion.
Right. Then we go into the fourth chapter, the horror
in the eyes.
There can be nothing normal in the mind of one who, knowing what I knew of the horrors of Tempest Mountain, would seek alone for the fear that lurked there.
There is nothing normal in this guy's mind at this point.
Yeah, I think he's pretty crazy and obsessed.
Yeah.
I mean, the last chapter we seen that he was really upset. He was out in the rain freaking digging in a grave. So it's like, you can't be sane at that point.
In the next paragraph, he writes something that for me is sort of the fragment of the story that really kind of rises above the story itself. It says,
when, 2 days after my frightful crawl through that crypt of the eyes and claw, I learned that a thing had malignly hovered 20 miles away at the same instant the eyes were glaring at me, I experienced virtual convulsions of fright. But that fright was so mixed with wonder and alluring grotesqueness that it was almost a pleasant sensation. Sometimes, in the throes of a nightmare, where unseen powers will one over the roofs of strange dead cities towards the grinning chasm of Nis, it is a relief and even a delight to shriek wildly and throw oneself voluntarily along with the hideous vortex of dream doom into whatever bottomless gulf may yawn.
At the end of the day, Lovecraft is constantly digging in graves and flying over dead cities and all that because it kind of turns him on.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know, it pleases him.
Well, doesn't it really turn us all on?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's why we read it. But,
yeah.
I mean, you look at that, and I guess I could see why some of the more buttoned-up literary critics, before he kind of reemerged in the 70s, thought of him as a sick person.
Oh, right, yeah.
A diseased kind of mind. And maybe it was because of things like, it's such a pleasure.
Well, I mean, people like being scared. I mean, that's why we see scary movies. That's why we, do roller coasters. That feeling is exhilarating.
Mm-hmm. Well, so his discovery of that passage was quickly masked, as most things are in Lovecraft, which is sort of another horror movie thing. I swear to you, I saw it, man. It was out there. I don't know why. It's not here now. And the people who saw the other thing drop out of the trees, they can't really describe it other than to say it was a devil.
Right. Yeah, that's their only description. It was a devil. What do you mean? Was it tall? What color was it? It was a devil.
So our guy is out there digging around, and as he's looking at the landscape of the house and the mountain and the surrounding things, something suddenly
clicks with him.
Yeah, it clicks. Related to the topography. There are all these mounds stretching out from the mansion, like tentacles.
Yeah.
Flowing out from the house. And he thought that they were caused by glaciers, but the regularity of them in the light suddenly kind of freaks him out.
He thinks of, like, moles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Before I knew it, I was uttering frenzied and disjointed words to myself. My God! Molehills! The damned place must be honeycombed. How many? That night at the mansion. They took Bennett and Toby first. On each side of us. Then I was digging frantically into the mound which had stretched nearest to me, digging desperately, shiveringly, but almost jubilantly. Digging, and at last shrieking aloud with some unplaced emotion as I came upon a tunnel or burrow just like the one through which I had crawled on that other demoniac night.
He goes crazy.
Yeah.
Running toward the mansion and just digging everywhere, digging around the cellar.
Well, he goes in because he believes it's the focal point, the mansion.
Right.
So he goes in the mansion, and he's just going. He's so sure that there is something under the mansion.
Yeah.
That he's digging around like all through the mansion.
Yeah. He notices that there's a hole in the chimney at the base of the house,
Uh-huh.
and then crash. But of course, a storm has started as he discovers this opening, and he kind of hides and he waits to see what the storm will bring out.
Yeah, he says he has like a little hidey hole, which is kind of strange that he doesn't go into much description exactly.
Well, yeah, I was actually a little puzzled whether he was inside the house or outside
of the house.
I think he's outside when he finds the hole in the chimney.
If heaven is merciful, it will someday efface from my consciousness the sight that I saw and let me live my last years in peace. I cannot sleep at night now and have to take opiates when it thunders. The thing came abruptly and unannounced, a demon rat-like scurrying from pits remote and unimaginable, a hellish panting and stifled grunting, and then, from that opening beneath the chimney, a burst of multitudinous and leprous life, a loathsome night-spawn flood of organic corruption, more devastatingly hideous than the blackest conjurations of mortal madness and morbidity. Seething, stewing, surging, bubbling like serpent slime, it rolled up and out of that yawning hole, spreading like a septic contagion and streaming from the cellar at every point of egress, streaming out of the scatter through the accursed midnight forests and strew fear, madness, and death. God knows how many there were. There must have been thousands. To see the stream of them in that faint intermittent lightning was shocking. When they had thinned out enough to be glimpsed as separate organisms, I saw that they were dwarfed, deformed, hairy devils or apes, monstrous and diabolic caricatures of the monkey tribe. They were so hideously silent. There was hardly a squeal when one of the last stragglers turned with the skill of long practice to make a meal in accustomed fashion on a weaker companion. Others snapped up what it left and ate with slavering relish. Then, in spite of my days of fright and disgust, my morbid curiosity triumphed, and as the last of the monstrosities oozed up alone from that netherworld of unknown nightmare, I drew my automatic pistol and shot it under cover of the thunder.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
And again, luckily, he's done this before. After seeing something horrible, he kind of unconsciously finds his way back to a town. Lovecraft's very good at going, I don't know how I got back.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to cover that in the story. And in a week, he sends for some folks from Albany to come down and blow that whole darn mansion up, and, as well as the top of the whole mountain.
Yeah. The level of the whole thing,
Yeah.
caving all the tunnels,
Yeah. But, because of something he saw when he shot the thing, he's still tortured. And the story ends with him saying,
What I saw in the glow of my flashlight after I shot the unspeakable straggling object was so simple that almost a minute elapsed before I understood and went delirious. The object was nauseous, a filthy white gorilla thing with sharp yellow fangs and matted fur. It was the ultimate product of mammalian degeneration, the frightful outcome of isolated spawning, multiplication and cannibal nutrition above and below ground. The embodiment of all the snarling chaos and grinning fear that lurked behind life. It had looked at me as it died, and its eyes had the same odd quality that mocked those other eyes which had stared at me underground and excited cloudy recollections. One eye was blue, the other brown. They were the dissimilar Martens eyes of the old legends, and I knew in one inundating cataclysm of voiceless horror what had become of the vanished family, the terrible and thunder-crazed House of Martens.
That is the end. Boo! Man, that is cool.
that is an action-packed, nifty story.
And that in the end too, it delivers.
It does.
That's
thousands of them.
Yeah, and just the one there. The one that sees a weaker one in the group and just turns on it and kills it and eats it right there in front of them, and the others jump in on it, and it's like, whoa, man.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That is cool.
It's almost like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre thing. There's this family of cannibals living down there.
Gosh, it feels like a movie. Like,
The more I go through these stories, I find that almost everything. It's sort of like when you read The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, almost every modern science fiction film. Science, not science fantasy necessarily, but science fiction film is right out of that book.
Right.
Look, reading these stories, I mean, like almost every horror movie is covered.
Yeah.
In some way or another.
Yeah. Like somehow Lovecraft has influenced, horror writers and horror filmmakers. Like maybe not even directly, he influenced somebody and then they influence another person and so on. There's one thing about the story that I've read this before. This is one of my favorites from when I was younger. But in my head, and you and I had an argument about this, is that he was descended, like he had one brown eye, one blue eye, and that he was descended from the Martens.
Right.
but that's not the case.
No.
I'm trying to figure out where I got that from.
Well, I had it in my head when I don't know if I read this when I was younger or not. I don't think I did. So I think I was under that assumption as well. And plus, it's a Lovecraft story about some cursed family line, so I just assume that the protagonist doesn't know it, but he's part of it.
Right, exactly.
And when he doesn't get killed in the first chapter.
Exactly.
That's when I thought, oh, well, they didn't kill him because they're related.
Yeah, like somehow they sensed his Martinez-ness.
Which is probably why in that Lurking Fear movie, he's named Martinez.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But no, he's not related at all.
No, he's not.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I'm glad he didn't need to be. But they don't really explain why he wasn't taken in the beginning.
In when he's realizing everything about the Burrows, he says, "My God, they were on either side of me," and I think maybe the implication is that it was easier for them to snatch those guys away out the window or through the door.
Right.
And maybe it was just because he was in between the two that it wasn't as easy to do.
Yeah.
And then the thunder scared the guy away before he could... I don't know.
Yeah, it was a little iffy, and I felt like... because it tricked me. Like, I thought that was... When I read it, because I went in with the memory of him being... He was left there. And then as I read the story, it just confirmed that assumption that I made. And then when I went back and looked, and no, it doesn't say he is that. But it's a really weird thing in the beginning of the story to have.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's
I think my only complaint is that little set piece is hard to understand. There's a couple of good solutions in here. Don't go in and fight it. Just set the whole building on fire. Right. And then this guy goes, I'm not going to go down there. I'm not, let's just blow the whole thing up.
Nuke it from orbit.
Yep.
It's the only way to be sure.
Exactly. There's lots of the Lurking Fear in music. I think there's an 80s punk band named the Lurking Fear.
Oh, there is?
Well, yeah, I found them online.
I missed this in my research. I didn't see it.
Yeah, cool little website. I mean, I think that they're one of the many Lovecraftian influenced bands that just are around, especially at that time. I actually had read a quote from somebody the other day that said, Lovecraft occupies a really strange space because he's a writer that is commented on as frequently by metal bands as he is by literary critics.
Yeah.
It's a really weird thing.
Right.
That both Joyce Carol Oates, and Metallica are both, concerned with this author, right?
What's going on with Lovecraft?
It's very strange.
Yeah, he's got a wide audience.
Yeah, people
appreciate different aspects of it.
Finally, something is bringing these two groups together.
Oh golly! Well, Chad, I think that about wraps it up for this.
Yeah,
this
went a little long this week, but it's a great story.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the story. Next week we are doing the very popular Rats in the Walls with we're bringing back a guest host, Mr. Kenneth Hite.
That's right. Ken Hite will be back.
And as our third guest host.
It's going to be an all-star episode. Powerful. I do want to thank Paul McLean again of yogsothoth.com
Great job, Paul.
For covering the Lurking Fear for us. It was truly beautiful.
It was beautiful.
Paul of Cthulhu. And that's all I have.
That's all I have. I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
hppodcraft.com. hppodcraft.com.